Here we go. Okay. So, I am Dr. Greg Schneider. I am a chiropractor at Natural Heart Doctor in Scottsdale, Arizona, which is a home for your 100-year heart, where we take a natural paleo lifestyle approach to improving heart health. If you wish to learn more about us here at Natural Heart Doctor, you can go to our website at naturalheartdoctor.com or follow us on social media at your leisure. Today, this is a fairly new thing for me. We'll find out if this is going to be a series of conversations or what have you, or a one-off. But I have somebody I find very interesting and inspiring to myself, and that is my father, James Schneider. Hello, how are you?
I'm good. You don't
Good.
have to call me James.
I know I'm going to call you Dad from now on, but I think that's probably more appropriate. So I have you. I wanted to do this conversation because obviously, like I said, you're an inspiration to me. But a lot of kind of the things that you've done in your life are are very impressive. And at 67 years old, correct?
Correct.
You're still going. And I wanted to touch on kind of, your life through your athletic achievements, as well as the condition that you've you have a sick sinus syndrome, and kind of how that came into play and affected those parts of your life, and then getting into coaching and all that. So just to start off, what is if you can summarize kind of your cycling accolades, coaching accolades, and I know you've also done some triathlon too. So starting with cycling.
Okay. Back in the mid 70s, I got interested in bicycle racing.
Yes.
And I was lucky enough to connect with a gentleman here in St. Louis by the name of Bill Logan. And he had a lot of patience for an 18-year-old who didn't know anything about cycling. And he mentored me for the first, I would say, 2 years of my cycling career. And that relationship alone, I think, was instrumental in my ability to progress very, very rapidly in the sport. I ended up competing for 12 years. I won 2 state championships, state championship road races in the elite division. The first one I won when I was 19 years old, and I was the youngest person to ever win the elite state road championship at the time. And then the second one I won when I was 27. So in all throughout those years, I was competing. I would say if I look back at my career, other than the Elite State Road Championships that I won, I would think that I'm most proud of the fact that in 1983, I qualified to compete in the Pan American Games cycling trials. And then in 1984, I qualified to compete in the 1984 Olympic trials for cycling. After I competed for 12 years, I began coaching. And I spent 5 years coaching a junior team. Juniors are 18 years and under. And spent probably 5 years where I didn't take a family vacation. Sorry about that, Greg. While I was driving the van full of teenagers around the country to compete in races. The team ended up being very successful. The last 2 years of the program, they were the number one ranked junior team in the United States.
And
Um,
what was the name of that? What was the name of that team?
the name of the team was the Spirits of St. Louis. Um, and in 19, let me think about what year it was. Probably 1990. I think it was 1990. Um, what was it, 91? Anyway, either 90 or 91. We put three of the kids from the team on the World Championship, Junior World Championship team. Um, and then, which was pretty impressive, I thought at least. One of the, I would say, probably six of the riders that came out of that program ended up being professional cyclists. Um, the the most successful one was Kevin Livingston. He ended up riding six Tour de France's, and at the zenith of his career, he was probably one of the top, I would say, 10 mountain climbers in the world.
Right.
Um, after on the bike, yep,
On the bike.
yeah. I don't know about any other climbing he may have done, but we're talking about competing on the bike.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So I did that for 5 years.
And that 5 years, so you said it kind of the apex of that was in 1990, 1991. When did that start? Around 87 or
Yeah,
88?
around 87. I started doing it around 87 or 88, which
And
was
how did you,
after I retired from competition.
right, how many years after you retired personally from competition?
About I it was about one.
About one. Okay.
Yeah.
And so how did you kind of, so you started coaching around there. How did you, I mean, was it like, hey, I'm coaching and people were immediately like looking to be coached by you? Like, how did you assemble the team? Obviously, it takes time to build something like that over years before you guys got to the,
Yeah.
world championship and everything, but kind of how did you get started with that?
Um, well, it started with just local racers. And when I mean local, I mean uh, kids from the St. Louis area.
Right.
And I would say probably for the first 2 years, it was almost exclusively kids from the St. Louis area. But as the team um, achieved more and more success, I started getting resumes from kids from literally all over the country. Um, I mean, by the final year of the program, we had probably 24 riders on the 24, 25 riders on the team. And I would say, I'm going kind of adding it up in my mind. Um, I mean, we had a rider from Alaska on the team. Um, we probably, I don't know, eight or 10 different states: Kansas, Iowa, Wisconsin, Arkansas, um, Colorado, um, or like I said, Alaska. So we had a lot of different kids. I mean, kids from all over the place. Um, and I was always a believer in that when it came to junior level cycling, you never wanted to discourage anybody from competing. So if a kid wanted to be on the team, the kid was on the team. Um, and that's how the team grew to be as big as it was.
So you accepted basically anybody who wanted to be on the team.
Yeah.
Uh, what I'm assuming there had to maybe have been some incidents where they got on the team, but then they weren't maybe living up to what the expectations were to be on the team. Did that ever happen? And did you ever have to?
Um, Not really. I mean, the way it kind of all played out is, I would have to. We had 12 to, like I said, eventually like 24, 25 kids on the team, and there are certain races that we could only take a limited number of kids. So I would have to pick who went to those races. And I mean, all of the kids got the same level of attention from me in regards to writing their training programs, checking in with them, and things of that nature. But obviously, some kids basically have more talent than other kids, and some kids are more compliant than other kids in terms of sticking to training programs. And so, there weren't. I I didn't have to always decide which kids went to what races, but when we were limited in regards to how many kids we could put in any given race, then I would have to say, okay, these 6 kids are going the best right now, so they're going to go to this race.
Right. And
But there
that's, I
were
mean,
a
that's
couple of times in 1990 we represented the United States as the national team in international competition, and like in those races, um, I had to limit the number of kids I could take.
and so obviously when it's just the best riders go, that's a pretty easy decision to make. Kind of, not maybe not easy, but
Most of the time it is, but not everybody agreed with my
right.
choices all the time. Imagine
I
that.
mean, they wouldn't be competitors if they didn't. No, that's kind of how it
Exactly.
shakes out. Um, so I had heard you say this before, and I would you agree that your abilities as a coach far exceeded your abilities as a cyclist yourself?
Well, certainly the people I have coached far far exceeded my results as an athlete. Yes.
Yes. So you are. I mean, your career was other outside of coaching was you were a mechanical engineer. So my thoughts are that type of career caters to a very specific type of person in terms of how their brain works. So how do you think that um, do you think that because of your ability to analyze things that played a large part in your success as a coach?
I think the answer to that question is twofold. Um, First of all, yes, because any engineers out there um, understand that engineering education is different than a lot of other educations, in that engineering education is about teaching somebody how to solve problems. Um, and training, coming up with the right training plan for any individual is solving a problem. Um, because everybody reacts differently to training. Um, the other thing is I was fortunate enough in my engineering career to work in the medical device industry. And as a result of working in the medical device industry, I learned a lot about physiology and anatomy. It was necessary for my work, and it certainly helped in the coaching side of things.
Yeah. That and the experience, obviously. But
That in the experience, yeah. When you're not very talented, you have to be smart. Otherwise, you don't get any results.
yeah, I had heard somebody say before that, you know, a person in your similar position is they had to know training, science, and all that stuff to get as much out of their bodies as they could just to hang on with the more talented folk. And they described himself as a Honda Civic competing against Ferraris, just doing the best they could to kind of hold
Yeah,
on.
maybe a Honda Accord.
Okay, yeah, slightly bigger engine.
Yeah, but a slightly bigger engine than the Civic, but
Yeah,
certainly not a Ferrari.
not a Ferrari. So, one thing I kind of touched on, or I wanted to kind of dive a little bit more deeper into, was you have kind of a you have a heart condition that is essentially listed under sick sinus syndrome, an electrical issue with your heart. Um, so if correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that you were diagnosed with this condition and you had a pacemaker implant. Was it at 33 years old?
It was.
Yeah. So was were you still competing at that time?
I was not competing, but I was still pretty fit.
Okay. So
Um,
kind of sorry.
that's all right.
So when kind of building up to this, did you ever experience any sort of previous issues that you kind of just brushed off and then later you kind of looked back on and was like, oh, maybe that was part of what was going on? Or what was kind of your experience with this and how it ended up being that you got the surgery?
Um, well, I mean, back then we didn't have heart rate monitors for training.
Right.
So we would, put the finger on the radial, get a radial pulse in order to, see if we're recovered from an interval or, what our resting heart rate was and things like that. And I was always aware, doing that, particularly when I was checking my resting heart rate in the mornings, that I had an irregular heartbeat. Um, and that was, I mean, it was, and I mean, that was just, genetic. Um, and then, as I became fitter and fitter, my resting heart rate continued to drop, um, to the point where my resting heart rate, if I was truly rested and not fatigued from training, my resting heart rate would be like in the high 30s. And I think I had a really good cardiologist when I first got the pacemaker and who diagnosed
Mhm.
the problem. And I think she was ahead of the curve in understanding that endurance athletes, have conduction problems. Um, and all the endurance training can bring that, bring that out. Um, and she recognized that the fact that, the combination of their irregular heartbeat, the genetic defect, if you would, combined with the endurance training, ended up in the sick sinus syndrome. And I mean, what precipitated me to go see her in the first place was, over the span of 6 months, I passed out 6 times,
That's
and
kind of
or 9 times, not 6 times, 9 times.
well,
So
that's even
more than
more.
once a month. And so yeah, I went to see her, and um, you know, put a Holter monitor on me, and um, we caught an episode, and basically I flatlined for 30 seconds.
That's kind of scary.
Yeah, I mean, when I was in the hospital to get the first pacemaker, um, the nurse was looking at my uh, uh, EKG and said, wow, he said, if you had been in here, people would have been pounding on your chest to get me to get it working again. And I told him I was glad I wasn't in there.
So it took you 9 times before you decided to seek out a second
Yeah,
opinion.
yeah, it did. Your mother
Uh,
was not pleased with that.
yeah, I can definitely see that. Um, were so at any point in time, kind of through that process, once you were diagnosed, had the surgery, um, was there a question about whether you would continue to do cycling, or were you always like, I'm going to do this so I can get back to doing that? Or I know at this point you were done with competing, but I know that obviously you continue to train.
Um, yeah. Um, no, like I said, I had a very good cardiologist, and she was really good in regards to working with me to optimize the settings on the pacemaker to allow me to continue to work out. Um, I mean, I don't think back then they would do these things called tilt table tests where they would basically strap you to a table and then put the table vertical and see if you passed out. You'd be straight up and down, couldn't move. Um, and I probably did more tilt table tests than all of the rest of her patients combined as we were trying to dial in the settings on the pacemaker to allow me to continue to train and not have the pacemaker going off all the time, like when I was sleeping.
Yeah.
So, but she was very, like I said, she was very, very good doc, and she would listen to what her patients were telling her.
It's always, I mean, they make a difference.
Yeah,
Good doctors. Yeah. Um, so that was post competitive career, probably overlapping a little bit with the coaching career when that happened. So I was very, very young, obviously born in 1991. So kind of at the tail end of the Spirits of St. Louis hype or infamy. Um, but from what I remember, and correct me if I'm wrong, you kind of took quite a bit of time away from coaching. Is that
yeah. Actually,
between at the from the early '90s to when?
so you guys were
And
all out of the house.
yeah,
Um, no, I took 15 years off of coaching.
and
Um,
what and
where I
kind of
trained,
yeah, why I mean, what was it? Was it me and Chris, my brother, or what kind of changed?
yeah,
What?
because I
Yeah.
wanted to spend time with you guys.
Right.
Um, and so, yeah, and I mean, coaching, like I said, for the 5 years I coached the junior team, um, we didn't go on a family vacation because all my vacation time from work was taken up doing that. And
Right.
the so I took 15 years off when you guys were at home, and then when Chris, your younger brother, went off to college, and we were empty nesters. One of the guys I had coached as a junior was now probably late 30s, early 40s. And he wanted to start a team. And he asked me if I wanted to come out of retirement to coach that team. And the timing was right because I never didn't love the sport. Um, so I said, sure, we could do this for like 2 or 3 years.
And what
Um,
was the name of this team?
that was initially it was Gateway Harley Davidson because this guy and his wife owned the Harley dealership, and they sponsored the team. Um, Eventually, they sold the Harley dealership, and we just shortened the name to Gateway Development Team. But that 3 years turned into 13. Uh, yeah, and we eventually became one of the top ranked amateur teams in the United States. Um, 13 of the riders that went through that program turned pro. Probably the most famous of which um, is a young man by the name of Sepp Kuss, and he is currently the I would say the world's most successful um, domestique. And a domestique is the guy on a cycling team that helps his teammates win races like the Tour de France and the Giro d'Italia and the Vuelta a España. Um, so yeah, I mean, once again, another successful program, but it was fun. I mean, there were so many uh, good young men that went through that program, and not obviously not all of them became professional cyclists, but they're all successful in their careers, um, and I think they all got something out of participating and being in the program.
Yeah. So that was, if I remember correctly, because Chris graduated in high school in 2011. So that had to have been around late 2011, 2012. Is that correct? Or was it maybe 2013 when that, because that would
Uh,
be 10 years.
we let's see, it's 2023 now. We stopped the last year we did it was the first year was 2020.
That was the
So
last year for the Gateway Devo team.
that was the last year for the Gateway Devo team. So what does that make it? 2020. That make it 2007 is when we
2007.
yeah is when we
Okay, so
started.
so it was before me and Chris were even, which I think from what I remember makes sense, before we were out of the house.
Well, you were off in college, weren't you? When did you start college?
No, 2007, I was a sophomore in high school. I started college in the fall of 2010, and Chris would have started in the fall of
Then it
2011.
then it started later than that because I know it started the year that Chris went off to school.
Chris went off to school.
Yeah.
So you were coaching the Gateway Devo team, previously the Gateway Harley Davidson team, around 2012, 2013. Was that around the same time that you started what is now Power Up Cycling? And did that have any sort of influence on why you decided to create the training center?
Um,
I know, and then yeah,
the
sorry.
the no. To answer your question, the no, I don't think it did. Basically, Kevin Livingston, when he retired, who was one of the guys who he was the young man who uh, rode went through the junior program and rode 6 Tour de France's. He he had opened a training center in Austin, Texas, um, where he had moved to when he turned pro. Um, And I always thought that, his name recognition amongst the cycling community in St. Louis was at least as good as it was in Austin, because he was the best cyclist to ever come out of St. Louis by leaps and bounds. Um, so, I had talked to him about opening up a training center. And it took me a few years to convince him it was a good idea. But I eventually convinced him it was a good idea. So we opened that training center. Um, and initially it was called Pedal Hard, which was his trademark name. And after a couple of years of a partnership, we had a difference of opinion in regards to which direction the business should go. So we parted ways, but we parted ways on friendly terms. I mean, he's still a very good friend. And we just rebranded the center as Power Up.
Power up. Okay. And because like I said, I think I remember kind of around the time that the Gateway Harley Davidson team you were coaching that, there was it was around that time the Pedal Hard and then Power Up kind of started as well. Is that
Yeah,
right?
I mean, yes, we opened up the training center in December of 2013,
Okay. Yeah.
which means this December will be our 10th anniversary, which is so hard to believe that it's been open that
It
long.
doesn't. It does not feel. I can tell you that I don't. I mean, that's insane.
Yeah.
So when you opened up that center, obviously your background is in cycling, but one thing that people also do bike riding, cycling in is triathlon. And that kind of obviously, people in triathlon need cycling programming and cycling training. And so that opens up a whole other door for you, as far as coaching as a business, because it's a different sport entirely. And I know that, was that something that you initially considered coaching for when you opened up the center, or was that something that kind of came down the road when you yourself decided to dabble in triathlon?
I, 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 we anticipated that triathletes would be a target audience from the get go. And not just to help them with their the cycling component of their events, but also with the rest of their training. Because there's obviously a lot of similarities, with any sort of endurance training, whether it's cycling or running or swimming, and putting together a program that optimizes somebody's training time um, is challenging. So, yeah.
So is that why you decided to, in order to better coach those athletes in that new sport, to become a triathlete yourself?
No, the reason I decided to dabble in triathlons is because your younger brother came home one day from when he was a sophomore in high school and asked me if I wanted to do a triathlon with him because his swimming coach at high school had suggested that he might be good at triathlons. Um, and obviously, when your teenage son asks you to do anything with him, as long as it's legal, you say yes.
Yeah, of
It doesn't
course.
happen very often.
Yeah. And so, and so, what was, I mean, I'm assuming that initial
Or
triathlon,
obviously, that was before we opened the training center.
right, a few years before.
Yeah,
So that first triathlon, I mean, at the time, he had to have been 16, 17, 18, because he's still in high school.
yeah,
Um, so you guys started with, what, a sprint triathlon, an
yeah.
Olympic distance,
Sprint.
those
So
sprint,
the
and do you
first
even,
The first summer we did a sprint, and then the second summer we did we did a couple of sprints, and then the second summer we did a couple of Olympic distances, and then the third summer we did a half Ironman, and then the fourth summer we did a full Ironman.
Okay. So what is typically the distance of a sprint triathlon, the typical distance of an Olympic triathlon, and then a half Ironman, Ironman?
I don't know.
I know they vary a lot based on
I
the
mean, I know what the distances are for the Ironman and the half Ironman,
of
but I
course.
honestly don't know for a sprint. I know an Olympic is, I think it's a 500-meter swim. It's like a 20-mile bike and like a 6-mile run, 10K.
Something,
Uh,
yeah.
Half Ironman is 1.2 mile swim, 56-mile bike, and a half marathon.
So 13.1 miles.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you basically every summer you built up here and there. And by the time Chris was 19 and you were 57 years old, you decided to go all in and do the full.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah. So talk to me about that. Like what was the training experience like? And then what was the experience of the actual event like?
The training experience is the reason I'll probably never do a full again. And the reason being is that it takes so much time because I didn't want it to be misery. So, you're talking about 15 to 20 hours a week of training for 9 months.
Yeah. And
Um,
so I realized we didn't. So the distance of the full Ironman is the, what is it, 2.3 mile swim, a 100
2.4 mile swim, 112-mile bike, and a full marathon.
and a full marathon at the end. And I've heard you say this before, and the mistake that people make when they think about a full versus a half Ironman is they think, oh, it's just double. And from a training perspective, you say no, it doesn't work that way.
No, it doesn't. At least I don't think it does.
Yeah.
I think it's more than double to do a full.
In terms
Uh,
of the cumulative toll it takes on your body, is that what you mean when you say that?
oh yeah. I mean, you think, well, yeah. I mean, just the running portion of it alone. Um, if you're going to do a marathon, you've got to put in a certain number of 20-mile training runs, and it takes at least a week to recover from that one 20-mile run. Um, I mean, yeah. So I mean, it's training. It's really you really have to, unless you're a pro, that's a totally different story. But if you're just, an age grouper, um, it's difficult to put the training program together um, in order to not kill yourself or not injure yourself.
Yeah.
Because I take a lot of pride in how few of my athletes that I've trained over the years have chronic use injuries.
Yeah.
Um, I do. I mean, I take a lot of pride in that, and the reason being is because I'm very cautious. I train people hard for sure, but I'm also very cautious and very aware of, little aches and pains and addressing them quickly um, before they become, chronic use injuries.
Right.
And I think, in your profession, um, to me, that's, you guys working with athletes. That's one of the things that, athletes need is, you don't say, I'll just tough it out or I'll run through it or I'll just, you know, suck it up and do it. Um, no, not if you want to be a lifetime athlete, then you have to listen to your body.
Right. Yeah. Uh, 1 second.
Sure.
I, um, yeah, I mean it's important obviously when you're training to manage all of that, and it's not as, I mean, part of the reason that my profession exists is exactly for that reason that you said, is that you know especially, I mean, I don't believe that you can necessarily effectively treat or coach somebody if you don't have firsthand experience with it to some degree. I don't think you need to be some sort of elite athlete necessarily, but you need to have some experience in the sense that um, you need to know what that person is going through. Um, but in that same token, you also need somebody who can remain objective about, uh, that the person that they're looking at, whether you're coaching them or treating them, as far as what their needs are with adjusting volume or intensity or what have you. Because I don't think that, and I think I've heard you say this before, self coaching won't get you the best results, because at a certain point you are biased to your subjective experience and you can't really always make the necessary adjustments because you're just too close to the problem.
Yeah. I I've believed that for a long, long time is if you're trying to optimize the results, and that's a caveat. If you're trying to optimize your results, I don't think you can be self-coached. And it really doesn't matter how much you know about exercise physiology. It's just you can't, if you're competitive, and the more competitive you are, the harder this is, you can't be objective about yourself. Whereas if it's somebody else, a coach can be, has to be objective about the athlete. And in
Right.
some cases, protect the athlete from themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. That's just a reality of both the jobs that we do.
Yeah.
Um, so that's impressive. 57 years old, a full Ironman.
It was,
Not many,
I
not
mean,
many people.
the good thing about it was, with all the training, the event itself, believe it or not, was kind of a non-event.
Yeah.
I never felt like I was at my limit. I never, it was a long day, that's for sure. But the funny thing is, as you know, Chris is a better swimmer than I am. But so he got out of the water first, and I figured I'd catch him at about mile 50. And so mile 50 goes by, no Chris. Mile 60 goes by, no Chris. Mile 70 goes by, no Chris. Mile 80 goes by, no Chris. And I'm going, so much for the plan.
Never gonna catch up.
And I didn't catch him until like mile 82. But then we finished the bike together and then ran the marathon side by side, which was really why I did it. I did it to do it with him. I wasn't trying to hit a specific time. I didn't have any personal goals other than to do it with him.
I mean, that's pretty cool.
It was.
Yeah. Um, and now, I mean, thoughts after finishing that? Did you think you were ever going to do another triathlon again?
Oh, a triathlon, yes. A full Ironman, no.
Did you think you were going to do a half again?
Yeah, I figured I would.
You would. And so since then, you've done a half. What, every 2 years, maybe every 2, 3 ish
Probably
years,
every year.
every year. Yeah,
Yeah, just one though.
just one. um, so being that you did that, at 57 and now you're 67 and you're about to do another one here in Memphis in October, 10 years later after the full, what, a lot of the people that you coach and train for triathlons are older people, I would say. It seems like from the people that I've met are, you know, a lot of them are in their 50s, late 40s, 50s, late and even later. What is something how do you encourage them? How do I know everybody's different, but if somebody is just starting out and they're at that age and they're trying to to accomplish something like a half Ironman or just a shorter triathlon, where do you start them with? Where do you start them?
Like I said, I'm very cautious because I don't
Yeah,
want, um, I don't want to injure anybody, and I don't want them to injure themselves.
right.
And I mean, the first thing we do is sit down and talk, and it's like, okay, how much time do you have to train each day? Because I don't want to give you a training schedule that won't work with your life schedule. Um, and then I talk about what's their athletic background, and I typically go back all the way to high school with a lot of people, particularly people I've never met, is because for a lot of people it tells you a lot about what their natural abilities are based on what they competed at in high school. Um, and and then we're just very, dependent. And then I just put a program together that Anchor is, it's a progressive program. No, it's not really rocket science. It's been around for decades. Um,
Yeah.
and then just, it's a matter of monitoring and um, and it's a matter of communication. Um, so, and then,
Yeah.
it's not, and I'm not, if somebody comes to me and says, I want to do a half Ironman 2 months from now, and basically they just got off the couch, it's like maybe you should rethink that and aim for an Olympic distance triathlon.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, and I mean, as older athletes take longer to recover from workouts.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of you can't give an older athlete back-to-back days, hard days, like you can a younger athlete. It just doesn't. You'll just break them down. So you have to take. I mean, that's a big consideration, and there's a lot. I would say there's probably more um, lower intensity workouts for the older athletes than I might give a younger athlete,
Mhm.
just because of that recovery component.
Right. So you gauge expectations for one, or you curb expectations, make sure that they're realistic for the person that you're looking at, and you make adjustments kind of when necessary. And communication is 100% key for success, especially with older athletes and when they're less experienced.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, coaching is science and art. And some people, in my opinion, some coaches rely too much on the science side, and some coaches rely too much on the art side. And I try and balance them. And to your point, it helps. Um, it helps if you've competed yourself, um, because I mean, if you give somebody a workout and you've done a similar workout, you have a sense of how hard it should be.
Yeah.
Um, so if that athlete comes back and tells you, for instance, a workout that, in your experience, on a perceived exertion scale, it should be about a 6 or a 7 out of 10,
Right.
and the athlete comes back and tells you, that was like an 8 or 9 out of 10, then you have to figure out what's going
Yeah.
on. And
So
so that to your point, that's where, having competed yourself helps a lot.
yeah. So you use those subjective measures, which I think what you're referring to is the rate of perceived exertion, essentially where one is entirely, like very, very, very easy, and 10 is like the hardest thing you've ever done. Um, what are some of the other like tools you use? Because I know that I've been there and kind of. So what are kind of the tools you use in the center and the kind of the general
Yeah.
setup or method?
I mean, obviously we use heart rate. We monitor heart rate. Um, in regards to cycling, we monitor power, because you can monitor power. Um, and then, as I've said multiple times, um, is the best training tool any athlete can have is a good training diary. And the reason for that, at least in my opinion, is a training diary tells you what works for you. Um, because every athlete is different and every athlete responds to training differently. And if you have a good training diary, you and your coach can refer to that, a race that you did 2 years ago, where you just crushed it. It's like, what was the training leading up to that? Or flip side, you go into a race and you just suck. It's like, why? Um, and it's not like you have to record everything, but you need to record your workouts. I'm a big proponent of recording your resting heart rate, and your weight in the mornings. Heart rate variability is another metric that's come into vogue in terms of recording
Right.
in the mornings, as opposed to resting heart rate. Um, I'm not 100% convinced myself that it gives you any more information than resting heart rate. But certainly it gives you, I'm not saying it's not useful, but it certainly gives you um, some good information.
Yeah.
Um,
So that's
the trick is, and this is where the art of coaching comes in, is the trick is is nowadays you can be overwhelmed with information.
Yes.
And there, and sometimes too much information is a curse. Um, and you just have to do it.
Yeah.
Um, it's interesting. I don't know if you. I did a podcast myself a couple years back with where I was talking to Seth Coos and Kevin Livingston, and one of the questions I asked them was, when Kevin was a professional, power meters for bicycles were just coming into vogue. Um, Sap, on the other hand, he's been using a power meter since he started riding a bike. And I, I asked them, what's the difference? How does it affect training? How does it affect racing? And they both said in race situations, um, they don't look at the power meter because on race day, what matters is what's actually happening.
Right. Yep. So it's funny. I actually I wanted to touch on a couple of things. I think that going back a little bit, the training diary makes a lot of sense, and it's important to have that data, subjective or objective, whatever, on different periods of time through your training history, and that is definitely something, being involved in the CrossFit space, that I don't think a lot of CrossFit people do. I think maybe the most serious athletes do, but a lot of it is we program week by week or even day by day, and we go solely based off the feelings that day. Which I think, if you're trying to maximize outcomes, isn't really the best way to do it. I think you can hit a certain level for sure, but to, again, maximize your potential in any particular area, that's probably not the best way to do it. But the heart rate variability thing and the devices, I actually have somebody that I still kind of program and coach for, and he wears periodically, and I've told him to kind of get rid of this, essentially, because I don't think it's doing a lot of help for him for a few different reasons, both professionally and as his coach. But he wears one of those whoops, and it tracks heart rate variability. And heart rate variability, I think, is a good metric. It's something that I think is beneficial to me as a chiropractor, because it's essentially measuring, right, your autonomic nervous system's ability to regulate itself. Do you have too much sympathetic drive, too much parasympathetic drive, which in most cases that is not the case. Most people are way too much on the sympathetic side, and they need more parasympathetic activity. So the rest and digest, they need to have better quality sleep, better recovery, all that sort of thing. And obviously these devices, they're not going to give you a pinpoint, real, present moment, great indication of whether that's the case, but you might see a trend over time, with regards to whether or not your recovery is good or not. But I told him a similar thing, that, because I think he was getting ready for a stage of competition in our season, where he told me he was using that and tracking his recovery. And I think I told him, like, a week before we go into this weekend competition, ditch that thing, because all it's going to do, especially if you're wearing it through the competition, all it's going to do is put an idea in your head, whether consciously or subconsciously, that's going to give you an excuse as to why you didn't perform well, or what have you, where metrics can be harmful as opposed to helpful.
No, I totally agree. I mean, I've told athletes the identical thing. It's like, I don't want you wearing that the week before a big race, because it'll mess with your head.
Yeah.
And and this is an extreme case, but if you look at an event like the Tour de France, I can pretty much 100% guarantee you that the competitors in the Tour de France are overtrained for 3 weeks straight because
Yeah.
of the event itself. I mean, coming back day after day after day after day. It's like I guarantee
Mhm.
if you looked at all the metrics, you would say that they were in a constant state of being overtrained.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the event demands it. Um, but that's competition. Training, on the other hand, when you're training and preparing, that's a different story. But there are times when, at least in my experience and in the way I do things, there are times when, for a brief period of time, I the metrics would probably say that my athlete is overtrained, um, because it adds an additional stressor, um, that, at least in the sport of cycling, this is not true in the sport of running, but because all it does in running is lead to injury. But in the sport of cycling, where there's not the pounding and you're not supporting your own body weight, um, you can add that additional stressor without doing damage, and you get an adaptation that is beneficial to competition.
Yeah. Because
It'd be interesting. I've never really coached swimming, but you could probably do the same thing in swimming, because once again, swimming it doesn't pound you like running does. Um, and it's funny, over the years, I've noticed that a lot of times swimmers will make better cyclists than runners do. And what I've theorized, um, is one of the reasons is because swimmers are used to doing hard days back to back. Uh, and they can, once again, because the sport doesn't pound them. Whereas runners, they're not used to doing hard days back to back, because if they did, their bodies would break down.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. With joint degradation and all sorts of musculoskeletal factors. I mean, there is something to be said about the cumulative load and stress your body takes during running. I don't want to misquote or um, misquote a fact here, but I do believe that there was um, a doctor, that somebody that I follow, who said that when compared to walking, which as human beings, nomadic creatures, we developed through evolution as we adapted to walk long distances, just hunter and gatherer, stuff like that. But we were not made to really run long distances. And running is actually, I think, again, don't want to misquote here, but I believe he had said that it's about 520% less efficient than walking, just because of the stress that the pounding is on the metabolic cost of it. Our bodies are not built efficiently for that, and I think that plays into um, the amount of that plays into the amount of tolerance we have for that activity.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, if you
yeah.
look at, the universe of triathletes, it would be interesting to determine the how many chronic use injuries are not the result of running?
Yeah.
I
I
mean,
mean, we do a
almost
lot.
all of them are.
I mean, well,
I mean, they
athletics is
swim and
running.
they cycle and they run, and they had all of. I mean, almost all of them are injured because of running.
Yeah. And it's not to say that it's not to say that running isn't good for you. That's not what we're saying. It's a specific amount, like an excessive amount of running.
Yeah,
Running without proper recovery, getting too many miles in a week. Obviously, in general, an Ironman is probably not the healthiest thing that you can do for yourself, but that's not really
no,
why you
probably
do it.
not. Nor is
Yeah.
a ultra distance 100-mile running race.
No. Yeah.
But I mean,
But
but we're human beings. I mean, first guy who ran a marathon died, right?
yeah, that's why it's become such a feat, right?
Said we should do that.
Yeah, right. Although
Seriously?
I think
Didn't the
I
first guy die?
yeah, and because I think the myth goes that like he was running from Athens to Sparta, and he ran it back and forth a few times. I think it was like the third time he dropped dead or
Yeah.
something where he gave the message. But I mean, don't quote me on that, but I think it was something like that. But yeah. So along those lines, actually, that brings up a good point. What is it that you think has attracted you to athletics in your life? Like, what is it that, like, in the moment, why you're doing it? Like, is it that you're comparing yourself to other people? Is it more of, what is that personally? Like, what is the personal feeling on that? That's kind of
As a competitor or as a coach?
that's a good point. So let's first say as a competitor.
Um, in the case of cycling,
Yes.
um, where I competed at a fairly high level, certainly not world class, but you know, national class. Um, there, a lot of it, a lot of times, it came down to who was willing to suffer more. So it was a mental challenge. I mean, there was a big, obviously there you have to have the fitness, um, you know, to compete at that level. But once you have the fitness, then it's like, you know, it's who's willing to suffer more, and you know who who is good, who is strategically, how do you optimize your chances of success? So it's probably those two things. As a coach, um, it's the strategic side certainly plays in as helping your athletes with strategy. Um, but I think, it's also hugely important for me personally to watch athletes do things that they didn't think they were capable of. And I tell people this all the time, and I'm not sure everybody believes me when I tell them. I mean, I've been fortunate enough over my coaching career to have coached some pretty phenomenal athletes. But I get as much satisfaction out of taking somebody, you know, who signed up for a 50-mile bike ride and has never ridden more than 5 miles in their life, and see them complete that successfully, as I do one of my elite athletes winning a race.
Yeah.
um, because it's just fun to watch people succeed, to help people succeed, however you define success. And it's different for everybody.
It is. I think that's a good point to kind of wrap everything up a little bit. A good note to end on. So you are, as I mentioned, you are doing another half Ironman in Memphis on October 8th, which I will be there obviously to support, which will be pretty cool. Um, so how can people learn more about the center, Power Up Cycling, and about you if they so choose to?
Sure. We have a website, obviously, powerupcycling.com. And we have a training center where you can come in with your own bike. And we do classes, 1 hour classes, where everybody that comes in gets an individualized workout. So everybody's not doing the same workout like you would do at a spinning studio. Is everybody is doing a workout specifically designed for them based on their fitness level, experience, and what they're getting in shape for. Um, we also do online coaching. We'll put together training plans for endurance athletes, whether you're a cyclist, triathlete, a runner, or even a swimmer. I've engaged a swimming coach just recently. Um, and we do clinics. On some of them are skills based, some of them are fitness based. And those are typically 1 day events. Some of them are in the center, some of them are outdoors. Um, but yeah, that's what we do.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks, Dad. Thanks for talking with me.
Sure.
And I will see you on the 8th of October.
Yep. Sounds good. Take it easy, Greg.
You too. Bye.